3 years ago, my parents told me they couldn't spare a cent for my daughter Willow's treatment. 6 weeks later, they handed my brother Griffin enough money to buy a 4-bedroom house. Willow died 4 months after that. Last week, Griffin was rushed to the ER with aggressive leukemia. The doctor said a full sibling could give him his best chance. My mother grabbed both my hands. "You have to help him, Autumn. He's family." I looked at those same hands, picked up my bag, and said one thing. Then the doctor stepped closer. "So But the answer wasn't what anyone expected. My name is Autumn Carter. I was 34 when this happened, and by then I had learned that a calm voice could hide just as much cruelty as a shout. Before Willow got sick, my family looked ordinary from the outside. Sunday dinners, framed school pictures in the hallway. My mother, Diane, lighting a cinnamon candle before guests arrived so the house would smell warm even when the room wasn't. My father, Robert, carving the turkey every Thanksgiving while Griffin told some story that made everyone laugh. Griffin was 3 years younger than me, but somehow he had always been treated like the fragile one. If he missed rent, Dad called it a rough patch. If I needed help, Mom called it poor planning. I learned early not to ask for much. Then Willow was diagnosed. She was 7. With brown curls, she refused to let me brush and a habit of drawing the same little house over and over. Yellow walls, blue windows, a crooked swing in the yard. She taped those pictures to our refrigerator until the door looked like a neighborhood built by crayons. The treatment the doctors recommended was experimental. It wasn't a promise. It was a chance. The kind of chance a mother grabs with both hands because doing nothing feels impossible. The cost was about $80,000. Insurance denied it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee, medical bills, and a calculator that kept giving me the same answer. I called my parents and asked for a loan of $10,000 so I could start the process while I found the rest. My father went quiet first. Then he said, "We can't spare a cent right now." My mother sighed like I had embarrassed her. Family shouldn't put each other in situations like this. Autumn, after the call ended, I slid down the cabinet and sat on the cold tile floor. Willow's drawings fluttered above me every time the refrigerator hummed. 6 weeks later, Griffin invited everyone to see his new house. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a wide backyard with a wooden swing hanging from an old maple tree. I asked how he had managed the down payment. Mom smiled. "We helped him. It was a gift." Griffin turned the key in the front door, and something inside me went completely still. I didn't confront them that day. I stood in Griffin's new kitchen while everyone admired the granite counters, the stainless steel refrigerator, and the basement he planned to turn into a home theater. Mom ran her hand across the island like she had personally built it. Outside, the wooden swing moved in the wind. No child sat on it. I went home and started selling everything I could live without. First, my car. Then a bracelet my grandmother had left me. I took out another loan against the house and picked up evening work after Willow fell asleep. I learned to answer collection calls without letting my voice shake. A fundraiser brought in about $10,000. Most of it came from strangers. A retired teacher sent $20 with a note that said, "For your little girl." My own parents sent nothing. Every night, I refreshed the donation page while the vent hummed over Willow's bed. She would look up from her crayons and ask, "Are we getting close?" "Mom," I always said. "Closer." I hated myself for how hopeful I made it sound. We never reached $80,000. The treatment window closed before I could gather enough. 4 months after that phone call with my parents, Willow died with one of her yellow house drawings folded beneath her pillow. She didn't make it. At the funeral, my mother sobbed into my father's coat. Griffin stared at the floor. Their grief looked real, and somehow that made it worse. They loved Willow enough to cry for her, just not enough to sacrifice when she was alive. For the next 3 years, I kept my distance without fully leaving. I still showed up at Thanksgiving. I still brought pie. Griffin still talked about his new kitchen, the projector in his basement, and the deck he wanted to build. No one mentioned where the down payment came from. During that time, I became a paralegal specializing in trusts and estates. I learned how families protected what they valued. I also learned how silence could protect the wrong people. Then, late one night, my mother called. Griffin had collapsed at work. The doctors found aggressive leukemia, and he needed a stem cell transplant fast. They said a full sibling could offer his best odds while the registry search continued. I drove to the hospital because I still didn't know what I would do. The waiting room smelled exactly like the last place Willow had taken a breath. Mom rushed toward me and clasped both my hands. "You have to help him," she whispered. "He's family." That was when I realized she wasn't asking. She was claiming me. I pulled my hands free and reached for my bag. "You don't get to turn blood into a command," I said. Mom's face went blank. Dad pushed himself out of his chair, the legs scraping hard against the tile. Before either of them could answer, the doctor stepped closer. "So that's a yes to speaking privately with our donor coordinator, conversation," I said. "Nothing else." The coordinator led me into a small room with beige walls and a box of tissues placed too neatly on the table. She spoke without rushing me. Testing was voluntary. Donation was voluntary. I could stop at any point. My family had no right to my decision or my results unless I chose to tell them. For the first time that night, I could breathe. I agreed to the initial blood work. Not for Mom. Not for Dad. Not even for Griffin. I did it because I refused to let their pressure decide what kind of person I became. When I returned to the waiting room, Mom stood immediately. "Well, I met with the coordinator." "That's not what I asked. It's the only answer you're getting." 2 days later, Lauren came to my apartment. Her eyes were swollen, but she didn't accuse me of anything. She only asked whether I would help contact relatives and share information about the donor registry. I said yes. That same afternoon, 3 cousins messaged me asking how I could abandon my own brother. An aunt called me vindictive. Mom had told everyone I was letting Griffin die to settle an old score. I didn't defend myself. I went to work, at my desk. I built a timeline, medical bills, loan papers, fundraiser records, messages about Griffin's down payment, dates, amounts, promises, no speeches. Just facts lined up in black ink. Then I drove to Willow's grave with yellow daisies and blue irises. "I'm trying not to become what they say I am," I whispered. The next morning, the test results arrived in a sealed envelope. Before I opened it, my phone buzzed. Mom had arranged a family meeting at the hospital. She thought she was gathering witnesses. She had no idea I was bringing evidence. The family meeting was held in a small conference room near Griffin's floor. Mom sat at the head of the table as if she had called a board meeting instead of gathering relatives to judge her daughter. Dad sat beside her with his hands folded. Lauren looked exhausted. My aunt, 2 cousins, and Griffin's godfather filled the remaining chairs, Griffin joined by video from his room. His skin looked gray against the white pillow. The moment I walked in, Mom stared at the folder under my arm. "What is that?" "The part of the story you left out." I sat across from her and placed my bag beside my chair. My aunt cleared her throat. "Autumn, we all understand you've been through something terrible. But Griffin is sick now." I looked at her. "I know. Then why are we even having this conversation? Because my mother told you I refused to help him." Mom leaned forward. "You wouldn't give us an answer. You weren't entitled to one." Dad used that same low, measured voice he had used 3 years earlier. "This isn't the time to relive old grievances." I opened the folder. No. This is exactly the time. I placed the first stack of papers on the table. Willow's treatment cost about $80,000. I asked Mom and Dad for a $10,000 loan so the hospital could begin the process while I raised the rest. Mom shook her head. There was no guarantee it would work. I never said there was. I placed the next page down. "This shows the fundraiser. Strangers gave me about $10,000. A retired teacher sent 20. A cashier from a grocery store sent 15. People who had never met Willow gave what they could." No one spoke. I slid another paper across the table. 6 weeks after Dad told me they couldn't spare a cent, Griffin received a down payment large enough to buy a 4-bedroom house. Dad's jaw tightened. That money came from a different account. I stared at him. "Money doesn't become morally different because you move it between accounts." My cousin shifted in his chair. Mom looked toward the others. She's making this sound like we chose a house over a child. You did. Her face hardened. That is cruel. No. Cruel was telling me I had put you in an awkward position by asking for help. Cruel was smiling at Griffin's new kitchen while I was selling my car. Mom pushed back from the table. We loved Willow. I know. My voice cracked on those two words. But I kept going. That's what made it worse. You loved her enough to cry after she died. You just didn't love her enough to give up something before she did. The room went still. On the screen. Griffin closed his eyes. Dad pointed at the folder. None of this changes the situation today. You're right. I turned toward the monitor. Griffin is sick. He deserves treatment. He deserves a donor. He deserves the chance Willow didn't get. Mom seized on that. Then do the right thing. I looked back at her. I already did. Lauren lifted her head. I reached into the folder and removed the sealed results. I met privately with the donor coordinator. I completed the initial testing. Mom's mouth fell open. My aunt whispered, "You did." Yes? Dad stared at me. Why didn't you tell us? Because it was my decision. Not yours. Mom stood so quickly her chair struck the wall. Then you're a match. I opened the envelope even though I already knew what it said. The coordinator had called me before the letter arrived. I'm not a full match. The medical team does not consider me the best donor candidate. For a second. No one moved. Then Mom sank back into her chair. You could have told us. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. I needed to know whether you could respect my right to choose before you knew the result. Dad's voice sharpened. So, this was some kind of test? No. The test was medical. What you did afterward was your choice. I looked around the table. While you believed Griffin might need me, Mom called relatives and told them I was letting him die. Dad told me to forget the past. None of you asked whether I was scared. None of you asked what the doctors had explained. You went straight to guilt because you still believe my body becomes family property when Griffin needs something. Lauren spoke quietly. Autumn has been helping me contact relatives since the first week. She also helped me share the registry information. Every face turned toward her. Mom blinked. What she never abandoned him, Lauren said. She just refused to be pressured. On the screen. Griffin shifted weakly. Mom, he said. She turned toward him. He swallowed. I knew. The room seemed to shrink. Mom's eyes narrowed. Knew what I knew you had refused Autumn before you helped me buy the house. Lauren covered her mouth. Griffin continued. I didn't know every detail, but I knew enough. Dad told me not to bring up the money around her. Dad looked toward the door. Griffin's voice grew rough. I stayed quiet because I wanted the house. No one interrupted him. I told myself it wasn't my decision. I told myself Willow's treatment might not work. I used every excuse you gave me because the truth meant I should have offered the money back. Mom began to cry. Griffin, you were starting your life. So was Willow. The words landed harder than anything I had said. A knock came at the door. The donor coordinator stepped inside and looked toward Lauren. We've received confirmation on a registry candidate. The match is strong enough to move forward with the next stage of evaluation. Lauren pressed both hands over her face. Griffin began to cry silently on the screen. Relief moved through the room, but it didn't erase what had just happened. Mom reached for me. I stepped back. Griffin getting a donor does not make this family whole. Autumn, please, no more rewriting Willow's life. No more telling people I abandoned anyone. And no more using the word family like it gives you authority over me. Dad stared at the paper spread across the table. What do you want from us? I picked up my bag. The truth. I looked at Griffin one last time. I hope the transplant works. I mean that. Then I faced my parents. But saving him will not erase what you refused to do for her. I walked out before they could answer. Behind me. Nobody followed. The registry donor cleared the final evaluation 3 weeks later. Griffin began the transplant process before sunrise on a Monday. Lauren texted me from the hospital parking garage because she said she couldn't make herself walk inside without telling someone she was terrified. I replied, I hope he gets through it. That was all. I didn't sit beside my parents in the waiting room. I didn't pretend the conference room had fixed us, but I checked on Lauren every few days. And when Griffin developed a fever during recovery, I stayed awake until she told me the doctors had it under control. Compassion didn't require me to come back to the table that had broken me. Months later, when Griffin was strong enough to speak without stopping for breath, I visited him. His hospital room was warmer than before. Afternoon sunlight touched the blanket across his knees. A paper cup of coffee cooled beside me while the machines hummed softly. "I'm glad you're alive," I said. He looked down at his hands. I should have given the money back. I didn't rescue him from the silence. He swallowed. "I knew you needed help. I knew Mom and Dad had lied about being broke. I kept telling myself the treatment wasn't guaranteed. No treatment is. I know that now." He apologized for the house, for the holiday conversations, and for letting Mom tell everyone I was trying to kill him. He said he had finally called every relative she had contacted and told them the truth himself. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was accountability, and I had waited 3 years to hear even that much. Mom and Dad sent long messages afterward. At first, they explained. Then they defended. Eventually, they apologized without using the word favoritism. I stopped answering. I no longer went to their Thanksgiving dinners or stood in family photos designed to prove we were fine. Griffin and I exchanged occasional messages, careful and honest. Lauren sent me a picture the day he returned home. The wooden swing was gone from the yard. I began volunteering with a local patient support group, helping families understand medical bills, financial assistance, and donor rights. I couldn't change what happened to Willow, but I could keep another frightened parent from facing a stack of papers alone. On the first Sunday of every month, I still visited her grave. I brought yellow daisies and blue irises, the colors of the little houses she used to draw. One afternoon, my phone buzzed beside me. Griffin had written. I told them everything. No excuses. I placed the phone face down on the grass. He had survived. And for the first time, so had I. I used to think survival meant holding a family together, no matter how badly they hurt you. Now I know better. Love does not demand your silence. Compassion does not erase your boundaries. And sharing blood never gives anyone ownership of your choices. Griffin survived because someone chose to help freely. I survived because I finally stopped letting guilt decide for me. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who called themselves family, share your story in the comments. You are not alone. And subscribe so you do not miss the next story.